Today we are doing part 1 of a very important grammar topic for the 11th and 12th standards. This is in fact one of the few new topics that is introduced in the 11th, which is the change of voice from active to passive and vice versa. In this video we are only looking at active to passive. In part 2 we look at the other way around. Now before we start, changing voice questions mostly deal with 4 tenses. You have the present tense, passé composé, imparfait and the future simple. This is not to say that other tenses cannot come. Okay, you are expected to expect questions on the conditional, the passé récent, and the simple and the future proche as well. Okay, for this particular year, passé composé questions are not going to be asked in the change in voice section of your paper. Okay, so you can largely expect present tense, imparfait, future simple, and the conditional also probably. Okay, but once you have learned the way of going about it, the procedure, the steps, the tense doesn't really matter. Okay, it is the steps, the way you go about it, that matters. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of how you go about it, it is important that you know it in the different tenses. It is crucial that you know this, otherwise it will become quite difficult for you to carry on with changing the voice. Okay, so let's quickly revise être in the 4 main tenses. In the present tense, it is je suis, tu es, il est, nous sommes, vous êtes, ils sont. Au passé composé, c'est j'ai été, tu as été, il a été, nous avons été, vous avez été, ils ont été. À l'imparfait, ce sera j'étais, tu étais, il était, nous étions, vous étiez, ils étaient. Et finalement, au futur, ce sera je serai, tu seras, il sera, nous serons, vous serez, ils seront. Okay, in the conditional, it will be je serai with an S, tu serais with an S, il serait IT, nous serions, vous seriez, il serait. Okay, learn it in the conditional as well. It is important that you know this before you proceed. Now, what is the fundamental difference between the active and the passive voice? Pretty sure you've already done this when you've done English grammar. Okay, you know your simple sentence, your basic sentence divided into 3 parts. You have a verb in the center, and on either side you have the subject and the object. The subject is the thing that does the action. It may be a person, an animal, whatever, a noun or a pronoun which does the action. That part of the sentence is called the subject. The verb is the action, okay, as you know, and the object is the thing or the person that receives the action, on whom the action has been done. Okay, so now when you have the subject preceding the verb and the object following the verb, that is when your sentence is of the structure subject, verb, object, it is an active sentence. More importance, more emphasis is accorded to the subject rather than to the object. When you have it the other way around, that is the object precedes the verb and the subject follows the verb, then you have it as a passive sentence where the object is given more importance, whereas in the active voice, the subject is given more importance. If you have noticed in the passive voice, we also introduce a new word here, which is in yellow, par or z. There is a difference between them, which we will see in the next slide. Okay, so for example, Paul mange les pommes. Paul eats the apples, where mange is the verb, Paul is the subject because he is the one who's doing the work of eating. Les pommes are the apples, they are the ones who receive the action of being eaten. You know when the subject is given importance, when the subject comes before the verb, it is an active sentence. Whereas look at this one, les pommes sont mangées par Paul, where you have les pommes as the object has come before the verb, sont mangées. Paul is the subject, has gone after the verb, and you have this par also coming in. This makes it a passive sentence. Okay. Now, when it comes for your exam, nobody is going to tell you that this is an active sentence. Please change it into passive. Nobody is going to tell you that. You have to identify which voice it is in, and you have to change it into the other voice. So let's begin with how you change from active to passive. Let's take the same example from the previous slide and work on it itself. Okay, so we'll take the same example, Paul mange les pommes. Okay, where you have Paul as the subject, mange is the verb to eat, and les pommes is the object. Okay, so the first step is that you find the subject, verb, and the object. Paul is the subject marked in blue. Moj is the object marked in pink. Sorry, Moj is the verb marked in pink. Le pomme adi is the object that's marked in green. After you're done with this identification, the second step for you to do is to interchange the place of the subject and object. What do you mean by interchange? The subject will go last, the object will come first. So can you see here? Les pommes comes first, Paul goes to the end. Okay, and you have to introduce par or the before the subject. So you have to put in par or the here. What is the difference between par and the? We use par for concrete actions. For tangible actions, we use par. For example, chanter, to sing, lead, to read, écrire, to write, okay, donner, faire, etc. All these take par. But as if you're talking about an emotion or a feeling, a state of being, something that is intangible, we generally use de. Adorer, to love, respecter, to respect, aimer, to like, détester, to hate, and so on. For these kinds of feelings, emotions, we use de. Now, what action are we talking about in this sentence? We're talking about mange, which is to eat. It is a concrete action, so we use par. So this is your second step. You interchange the subject and the object, get the subject in front, get the object to the end, put in par or the before the subject according to the verb. The next step is, now that you are done with the subject and the object, you are done with par, the next step to tackle is the verb. Okay, now look at the verb. From the given verb, that is manger, you have to determine two things. You have to determine the original verb, that is the full verb, and you have to determine the original tense. Two things you have to get out of this verb here. So, mange is the conjugated version of which full verb? Manger, M-A-N-G-E-R. And in the given sentence, in which tense has it been conjugated? It is in the present tense. So you have to determine the original full verb, that is manger. You have to determine the original tense, that is present tense in this case. Okay. After you do that, and after you're sure about that, you have to do your last step, which is introduce h in the original tense and follow it up with the participle of the original verb. The participle has to be in agreement with the new subject because we are using h as an auxiliary. Okay, so être has to go into the original tense, that is être goes into the present tense now for les pommes, and it becomes sont. Okay, the participle of the original verb is placed after that. The original verb is manger, whose participle is manger, M-A-N-G-E accent, and then the participle has to agree with the new subject. Les pommes is feminine plural. The agreement is E and S to the participle, which gives you your passive statement. Les pommes sont mangées par Paul. Paul mange les pommes. Paul eats the apples. Les pommes sont mangées par Paul. The apples are eaten by Paul. Okay. Now, there are three little variations which you need to keep in mind. If the active sentence has additional information, any extra information, extra words after the subject verb object, you have to retain that as it is, keep it where it is, rewrite it exactly as it is after you do the passive transformation. So, Paul mange les pommes chaque matin. This chaque matin is extra. It is not part of the subject verb object. So, after you do the transformation from active to passive, you retain that chaque matin as it is at the end of the sentence. Okay, you don't bother about that. It is just there to distract you. Then the second point you need to keep in mind is we worked with the subject Paul. Now, what if the subject is on? Okay, in the active voice, what if the subject is on? For example, on mange les pommes. In the sentence we took it as Paul mange les pommes. What if it is on mange les pommes? Okay. Now, when the subject in the active sentence is on, we simply disregard on, for the simple reason that on is only used in the active voice. Okay, we can never use on in the passive voice, and by default, since we do not use on in the passive voice, neither do we use par or the. When the active subject is on, that on completely disappears in the passive voice. The par also disappears. The passive sentence will end with the participle when the active sentence starts with on. So on mange les pommes is you bring les pommes in front, and the on you just throw away, and then you straight away start working on the verb. Okay, so it will become les pommes sont mangées. Someone eats the apples are eaten. Even in English, we wouldn't say the apples are eaten by someone, right? You just throw away the subject. Okay, there is no on, there is no par or de. The third rule is if the subject Paul was replaced by je or tu or il or vous or any of the personal subject pronouns, what happens then? You cannot say par je. Okay, when the je goes at the end, it cannot be par je. Same, if it was tu, it cannot be par tu. Okay, so when the personal subject goes to the end of the sentence, it has to become an emphatic pronoun. Which emphatic pronoun? The same emphatic pronoun which corresponds to the personal subject. Okay, the emphatic or the tonic, whichever you learned it as, it's the same thing. Okay, so if it's je in the active, it has to become moi in the passive. Par moi, by me. Okay, tu has to become toi, il has to become lui, elle will remain the same, nous and vous also remain the same, il has to become eux, elle will remain the same in the plural as well. Okay, so remember that when you have a personal subject as the subject, okay, personal subject pronoun as the subject, when that goes into the passive voice, it becomes an emphatic pronoun. Okay, so now I've summed this all up into one table with another sample question here for you. So let's work on this now. So the question here is: le paysan construira une maison dans les montagnes. So your first step is to figure out what is your subject, verb, and object. Your subject here is le paysan because it's the farmer or the peasant who's doing the work of constructing. Your verb is construira. The object is une maison. You have extra dans les montagnes, which is not important. Leave it where it is at the end of the sentence. Okay. The next step you have to do is switch the subject and the object. So une maison will come to the front. Le paysan will go to the end. You will introduce par or the. Construire is to construct or to build. It is a concrete action. So it takes par. Now time to work on the verb. From the verb given, that is construira, you'll have to find out the original verb and the original tense. The original verb is construir. From the way it looks itself, you can make out that it is in the simple future tense. Okay. Then once you've defined the original verb and the original tense, you have to take être in the tense followed by the participle of the verb. So être in the future simple for une maison becomes sera, and the participle of construire in agreement with une maison is construire, and the agreement, because it's feminine singular, is an extra e, becomes construite. And that is how you get your passive statement: une maison sera construite par le paysan dans les montagnes. Okay, le paysan construira une maison dans les montagnes. The farmer will construct a house in the mountains. Une maison sera construite par le paysan dans les montagnes. A house will be constructed by the farmer in the mountains. Okay. Systematically, if you follow the procedure, nothing will go wrong. There are some sentences here on the next slide for you to try by yourself. I'll be dealing with the passive to active transformation in the next video. Thank you.